Good afternoon, everyone. Please continue to enjoy your lunch, but I'm Kyung-wha Kang, the new president of Asia Society, and probably the newest kid in this community. Speaking to Dorinda, it does feel like this is a real family who get back together here for this wonderful prize every year, and it's been going on for what, 15 years? Yeah, so congratulations for that. And I'm, as the new kid on the block, very happy to join this community to celebrate this year's winner. The 2024 Osborn Elliott Prize for Excellence in Journalism on Asia. Since establishment in 2003, the Osborn Elliott Prize, which we affectionately refer to as the Oz Prize, has been awarded annually to a writer or a team of writers who has produced the best example of journalism about Asia in print or online during the calendar year. And as many of you know, the Oz Prize honors the late Osborn Elliott. I'm learning all of this for the first time, but a legendary journalist and former editor-in-chief of Newsweek. Newsweek is something that we in Korea as college students would read to learn our English. But Mr. Osborn Elliott set new standards for reporting and editing and became one of the earliest practitioners of civic journalism, with a deliberate focusing on the journalistic enterprise on urgent issues of public affairs and beyond. Osborn and his wife, the late Inger Elliot, were staunch supporters of Asia Society and regular fixtures at our programming well before the idea of the prize was born. They were both enthusiastic stewards of the prize and of this event, and following Osborn Elliott's death in 2008, Inger continued to play a very active role in planning these annual events until her health declined in recent years. Inger passed away in January this year, I'm told. And while I did not have the chance to meet her, I understand she brought both a keen sense of style and exacting detail to these events. So we are extremely grateful for everything she and the Elliott family have done for the Osborn Elliott Prize and for Asia Society. My heartfelt congratulations to this year's winner of this exceptional prize, the Outlaw Ocean Project, which made extraordinary series of reports on China and the global seafood industry. My sincere appreciation also goes to the members of the independent jury for this prize, chaired by Mr. Marcus Brauchli, managing partner of North Base Media and former editor of the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. Furthermore, we are thrilled to have the very first winner of the prize, Elizabeth Rosenthal, right there with us today, along with the 2006 winner, Barbara Demick. Is she here? Barbara, I read your book, who is also a member of the Oz Prize jury. I'm very much looking forward to today's conversation with this year's honoree, Ian Urbina, about the Outlaw Ocean Project. But before we turn to the discussion, let me now invite Dorinda Elliot, Executive Director of the Fairbank Center at Harvard University and a member of the Oz Prize jury, as well as Mr. Marcus Brauchli, Chair of the Oz Prize jury, to say a few words. Dorinda.
Thank you, Dr. Kang. I'm really thrilled to be here today, and I just wanted to say that Oz and Inger were longtime trustees at Asia Society and really loved this institution so much. So I'm really thrilled to be here today. And I guess I would have to say, I also wanted to give a big shout out to the members of our jury. Firstly, Marcus, for wrangling us and making it all happen and being such a wonderful head of the chair of the jury, and Barbara, I think you're here. Barbara, thank you. Glenda Gloria, the executive editor of Rappler, Nisid Hijari, the author and member of the Bloomberg editorial board, Zuraida Ibrahim, executive managing editor of South China Morning Post, and Norman Pearlstein, who also chaired this jury for many years. Thank you for that. So I guess this is sort of Honor Your Father's Week for me. Just yesterday, I was in Washington, D.C. To celebrate the 104th birthday of my father-in-law, Adi's father, who is an amazing man who is still sharp as a tack, even as he was celebrating his 104th birthday. And he has a great line, which is he says, "The first 100 years were the hard ones." So, but what I wanted to say today is that my father, Oz, would have been very, very proud to be associated with Ian Urbina and the Outlaw Ocean Project. Oz talked a lot about the need for journalists to have a fire in the belly, the insatiable drive to find and publish the truth. When you realize the incredible degree of difficulty, the challenges and danger involved in Ian's reporting, high-speed motorboat chases after law-breaking fishing fleets, clandestine interviews with indentured crew members, it's very obvious that Ian Urbina certainly has that fire in the belly. This guy will do anything to get a story. Oz also believed that journalists have a responsibility to society. The journalists should be human beings first, and journalists second. No doubt he would have been very moved by the humanity and compassion with which Ian Urbina has relentlessly pursued his subject, uncovering the corruption driving the Chinese fishing industry and the human rights abuses and brutality endured by the crew members on the fishing boats. Oz's North Star as a journalist was humanity. He always said that his proudest moment in journalism was producing a cover story for Newsweek on Black America in July 1963. He commissioned the pollster Lou Harris to, for the first time ever, poll what Black Americans thought. Harris enlisted Black high school teachers to do the interviews. And the following year, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act, prohibiting segregation and discrimination based on race in public facilities. Oz's second proudest moment was in 1967, following race riots in America. In response, he thought Newsweek should set out to seek solutions to the race crisis. The magazine had never before produced this kind of advocacy journalism, and the result was The Negro in America, What Must Be Done, which was published in November 1967. Quote, "We felt a moral responsibility to help the country plow through these problems," Oz said in an interview later. And I think that's a spirit that is more important than ever today. Ian Urbina's work on the global fishing industry epitomizes that sense of social responsibility that Oz cared so much about. It epitomizes the relentless drive for the truth and the sense of humanity that Oz believed was the stuff of great journalism. And in short, I would have to say that Ian's work is what the Oz Prize is all about. So congratulations, Ian.
Thanks, Dinda. That's wonderful. I just want to talk a little bit about the jury. Every year, this jury gets to dive into narratives and investigations from journalists across a really vast region, from Mongolia to Australia, from Japan to Pakistan, and everywhere in between. We see reporting and writing from journalists from around the world, but importantly, we also see a lot of really great writing every year from journalists writing, sorry, I shouldn't say writing anymore, I should say writing, photography, video, audio from journalists of the region. And that's been a huge and important change in recent years. It keeps getting better. The ambition of these journalists is to put a focus on issues that matter to their societies. Last year's entries included powerful work on the systemic abuse of women. In India, there was reporting about the mistreatment of women who make iPhones, women and girls still being affected by the infamous chemical spill in Bhopal, women who lose their uteruses to doctors who were incentivized to sterilize. Just an interesting but horrific array of abuse of women stories. There was also powerful reporting about environmental issues in Indonesia and Cambodia, about the scarcity of water in much of the region, The Wall Street Journal anticipated many of the profound economic challenges facing China. Rappler in the Philippines, which I think you've heard from here at this event before, uncovered a series of abuses of domestic workers by diplomats who hide behind their immunity. And all of this may sound like, in fact, does sound like a very depressing reading list, but I should say it is far from it, because this is the kind of journalism that demands answers and drives change. And nothing we saw last year was more powerful than the work Ian led. He and his colleagues at the Outlaw Ocean Project took years in their highly original, ambitious work, were meticulous and transparent in their work, and I think that's one of the things that was really distinguishing for me, and I think for the jury looking at this, Ian, was the way you talked about how you did your work. And it was grounded in transparency that would lead to great credibility. And it was authoritative because of that. And I think that's perhaps a lesson for all journalists. So let me now hand this, I guess, first of all, Ian, you should come up and receive the award, and then we'll hand this over to you and Bobby for a conversation. Sure.
Oh, thank you.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. My name is Bobby Ghosh. I'm a great admirer of the Outlaw Ocean Project and of Ian's work. And the first thing I'll say, and I might say this more than one time this afternoon, is please go to the website and read the amazing journalism they do. It's available in all kinds of formats. There's terrific, really edge-of-your-seat video. There's audio. There's amazing stories. There's a lot of information and data. Even if you have very little sort of appreciation, and actually even more so if you have very little appreciation of what goes on, what brings that, it wasn't on the menu today, but what brings that salmon to your table or that squid to your salad. I think it's absolutely essential reading. It's the kind of journalism that you see in almost no other news outlet. I've worked in several fairly large news outlets, and I'm aware of some of the challenges in covering this story. Journalists are not unaware of the importance of the story, but the logistics and the practical difficulties in getting that story are so great that it sort of turns off or in some cases frightens news organizations. There's real risk to life and limb, as well as cost and risk of not getting the story that comes in that particular in the oceans, in the place that very few journalists have any opportunity to go to. And Ian and your team have made that the core center of your work. You work in the high seas and you bring these stories to us. So please, please, please go to the website and consume that this very, very valuable trove of content. Ian, let me start by asking you first to just, for the audience, set the stage a little bit about the scale of the Chinese deep sea fishing operation. That's the journalism that brought you this prize.
Yeah, I mean, so we focus on the watery 2/3 of the planet and try not to be an ocean or marine focused news organization, but rather an organization that sees that watery 2/3 as if it were a country. And so that means trying to find a diversity of stories out there, be they about abusive migrants crossing the Mediterranean or illegal whaling in the Southern Ocean or arms trafficking from Yemen, et cetera. The decision to look at the Chinese fleet was one whereby the thought was this is a very tough target because it's so opaque, and it's a very important target because it's so huge. in the realm that we're covering. The Chinese distant water fleet, by which I mean those vessels that are on the high seas or international waters or in foreign waters, is larger than the next three fleets combined. So the Chinese are the biggest player when it comes to ships on the water. But they're also the most important when it comes to what happens on land, because China has become the manufacturing center of the world for virtually everything, including seafood. So a lot of catch coming off of French or Spanish or American or Canadian vessels ends up getting brought to shore in those countries and then shipped to China for processing and then shipped back. So we thought, tough target, but really important one, and probably not one that others would tackle, because it'll take a long time to get out onto the vessels and to really map the supply chain.
So we're talking about 6,500 ships. Give us a sense of proportion. How big are these ships? What is the range of sizes?
Yeah, so I mean, so think of the distant water fleet. That is, well, first think of the universe that is the ocean. And the two big categorical players out there are fishing vessels and merchant vessels. The merchant vessels are carrying stuff, grain, oil, Nike shoes. Then the fishing fleet of the world is the more plentiful player. So of maybe 55 million people that work at sea, about 50 of them are on fishing vessels. And it's a very small minority of humans that are on merchant vessels. Then figuring out how big is the Chinese distant water fleet, think tank in DC puts the number at 17,000. The Chinese government itself puts the number, around 2,000. That's a big range. So job one was to try to figure out what do we think the number is, and that took 9 months of, hustle. 6,500 vessels. We honed in on the squid fleet for a couple of journalistically tactical reasons. It's aimed at a product that everyone knows, calamari. So that would allow us to take the story out to the rest of the world in a clear supply chain way. B, they're notoriously brutal ships because they largely, across lots of countries, they're at sea for an unusually long time, because squid is in a lot of distant places. And so these vessels, more so than, say, a tuna vessel or a fish meal vessel, are going to be at sea upwards of 3 years in some cases, and fishing the whole time. Motherships come out, pick up the catch, bring it back, but the fishing vessel stays out there. So you have real enslavement risks heightened in squid vessels. And tuna vessels, for example, which is another big player, are very well monetized. It's a very moneyed fleet. And so the chance of really dark stuff happening on them is there, but not as pronounced. And these vessels, to get to your question, the Chinese vessels are typically 40-man crew, 35-man crew. These are all males. I've yet to find a female on these kinds of vessels. And predominantly pre-COVID, you had typically 5 to 10 officers, and those are almost always mainland Chinese. And then pre-COVID, a lot of the crew were Indonesian, Filipino, sometimes African. But post-COVID, the logistics of moving people around became a non-starter. So then you had a lot of really interesting labor recruitment inland China, which is essentially the same model, because these are they're both Chinese, mainland Chinese, but one has no clue what they're doing. They're not savvy to the world of fishing, and they're easily bamboozled, and the other is not, So the trafficking concerns were just as pronounced within Chinese crews.
And that includes essentially slave labor from Xinjiang and sort of forced into these ships.
Yeah, so think of the project writ large as divided into, there's what's happening on the water and there's what's happening on land. And the on the water part has a standard model of concern with regard to human rights and labor. We never found, there's some stuff coming out now, but we've never found Uyghurs or Xinjiang workers or North Koreans on the ships. The trafficking and labor concerns on the ships were other crew that were essentially kept there against their will. injured, sick, wanting to leave. The terms of their contract were shifted after they left port, kept at sea much longer than they had been told they would be. These sorts of stories and a lot of violence, disappearances, etc. Now, move the story on land, and you track the supply chain of this product, in this case, seafood. The second part of the series was looking at when the stuff gets to factories in China, what are the concerns inside these factories from a labor perspective? And that's where we uncovered significant numbers of North Koreans and Xinjiang workers in the factories.
And the malpractices and crimes that are being committed are on board the ship between the employers and the employees inland in those processing plants. But there are also sort of malpractice or breaking of international law in terms of where these ships go, into what waters they go, into how they bully other fleets and sometimes bully even smaller governments in order to basically fish in waters where they're not meant to be.
Yeah, again, if you divide the categories of crimes and concerns, as we call them, into, you've got the human-focused labor and human rights ones, and then you have the marine ones. And the marine ones have subcategories, as you cited. You have illegal fishing in the form of incursions into other people's waters, just straight up poaching, stealing stuff that you're not supposed to take. But you also have wonkier ones, like you're using gear you're not supposed to. It's net with too small a mesh size, and that's banned because it's catching too many juveniles and you're going to collapse the stock. Okay. But you have lots of different marine type ones. But then you have geopolitical ones, like you cited, where fishing vessels are actually a front for military purposes. South China Sea is obviously the place where they're not fishing. They're there to show muscle and to swarm scenes so that they can intimidate others in the waters. And then you have food security concerns like coast of West Africa. So you've got lots of different subsidiary concerns to the marine concerns, all wholly apart from the human rights and labor.
And you mentioned the coast of Africa, and that's something I was not fully aware of until I began to watch those videos and read those stories, which is the sheer breadth of this fleet of 6,500 or however many vessels are going from everywhere from the coast of Gambia to the Galapagos and to the Middle East, off the shores of Oman, this is a huge worldwide operation, and it gives China a kind of grip over seafood supplies in the world, which is something that I imagine the incoming administration in this country will be concerned about. But it also, to your point, serves as a force multiplier of Chinese geopolitical ambition. Right? These ships are not trying to hide. They're trying to conceal themselves from satellites and prying eyes, but at the same time, they're not trying to hide their Chineseness. They are flying the flag. They want people to know that they are an instrument, an arm of the Chinese state. Yeah,
I mean, as good editors do, they help writers, reporters think bigger, and there came a point in this work, in conversation with an editor at The New Yorker, where Nimal Ames Scott is his name. He said, well, why is this about Chinese or seafood? Why isn't it about power? And sort of it's power on water, and this is just one space of power being projected in a new way, not different than the U.S. and the West has done historically, but it's just the current version of it. And if we think of it more as power as transmitted through boats, how can that get us into Belt and Road and get us into port deals and get us into all sorts of other on-land issues that are sort of being inroaded by this fleet? And that opened up a whole new horizon in 6 months more of work to think about, the fleet as more than just a purveyor of seafood, but rather as a way to get access to markets, for example.
So, as I was saying earlier, other people have tried to cover this story, but from shore. What makes your stories sort of rise above the ordinary, first and foremost for me as a consumer, was the fact that you're reporting it from essentially the front lines, from So tell us a little bit about your operation, how many people work for you, and then I have some follow-up questions on how you get there.
It's a small little kind of motley crew we have, decentralized. I live in Washington, D.C., but everyone on staff lives elsewhere, a couple in Brazil, one in Africa, and 2 in Ireland. There are only 11 of us now, full-time. And of those, there are 4 of us that are kind of traditional journalists. 2 of us, I do all the conflict zone and at-sea reporting, and one of the reasons I left the New York Times and kind of created this nonprofit was because I only wanted to tackle stories that I could report in theater, whether it's Libya on the ground or, the Antarctic, and so what that means is if you're going to take on China as a topic, when we began 4 years ago, the thought was, well, how can we do things that no one's done before? Can we not just get to the fishing grounds where the Chinese are and put drones over them and gawk at them through long lens, but could we talk our way on board? Obviously the commonsensical answer is no, but that has never stopped me before. And so we kind of cooked up lots of strategies and then the other big question is, where should you go on the planet to the point you made before? Because these clusters of this squid fleet are all over the place because the squid are migratory. And so where should we go to be able to tell different stories? Let's go to West Africa to tell the food security story. Let's go to the Galapagos to tell the biodiversity part of it. Let's go to the Falklands just because there's a crazy bunch of actors there, and we don't know what's going to unlock. And then let's go to the sea border with North Korea. These are all the 4 places we went for long at-sea ventures to talk about a very complicated, interesting set of issues there where UN sanctions busting and huge numbers of Chinese fleets entering North Korean waters and North Koreans paying the price for it. So that was sort of the map. And then how can we actually get out onto the water and find vessels that can take us out that far from shore safely?
So these are people who are committing crime. They know they're committing crime. There's no mystery about it. They're not innocent of what they're doing. How do you persuade them to let you come even close, never mind getting on board their vessels?
So I would stand down that preface and say, do they know they're committing crimes? I don't know how to answer that. I think they know they are doing what they've always done, and they know that they may play a little bit fast and loose with certain rules. But capital C crime, I think most of these captains don't think they are. I think they're just being, a lot of these captains are in their 70s. They've been doing this for 40 years. And they've been going to the same areas all that while, and the lines moved on them. They didn't move on the lines, is what they would say. And they also follow the fish, and the fish don't really care where the national lines are. So this is the common statement. Now, when they beat,
Exactly.
Yeah, some things it's not nuanced, but even, in 2009, the UN did an incredible survey of, in this case, Cambodian deckhands on Thai vessels, but it's illustrative, and almost 50% of them had witnessed murder on vessels of other crew. So this is an unusually violent space, distant water vessels, and the Chinese captains are no different. The stories of, so yes, the Chinese captains know they're committing those sorts of crimes. Why do they let us on board? I don't know. I still don't, having done this many years, I think they are curious, and we have the luxury of time so that we don't have to rush the relationship. We can let the ice melt, not break, and we go out there and sit for a while. And most of them say no. When we approach and get near, and we finally, after the, I was recounting this before, day 1, we're out on a big ship. You can't get to the high seas unless you're on a huge Navy order ship because the conditions are so violent. Then day 1, you stay on the big ship and you're doing bridge-to-bridge communication. Obviously, I don't speak Chinese, so I have a translator with me. Introducing ourselves, always saying we're journalists, we're here, we're going to respect our distance, no threat to you. We just want to tell the story of what this work is like. No one knows what you do and how it is. Day 2, we get in a skiff, crane puts a fast boat in the water so that we can get closer because two big ships shouldn't be too close to each other. So we get within 20 meters of the gear. Now we're able to see line of sight. They can see us. They can see Ed O, my videographer, translator. He's Asian. That's a little disarming. So it's not just a bunch of white guys. And now we're on walkie-talkie. Full day of out there filming, how's it going, but keeping our distance. Day 3, and I'm accelerating the timetable. We're back out there. Here we are again. How's it going? And then we pop the question, we know you probably don't have, you've been out here how long? You told us on day 1, 9 months, 2 years. You probably don't have fresh vegetables and meat. We'd love to break bread with you, come aboard, give you a gift. Would that be okay? 7 out of 10 say absolutely not. But 3 say, okay. And I think they're proud of what they do and interested in talking to folks because they haven't seen folks for a long time. And I think some of them are also clueless, just to be very blunt. They live at sea. They don't read the New York Times or the New Yorker or whatever. They don't speak English. And they kind of shrug off what could happen to me. I live out here and I'm the boss on this vessel. And they always lay very clear ground rules, and you never break those. If the captain invites you on board, no one's going to do harm to you, but you're there as his guest, and the minute he changes his mind, you got to get off.
Is there a risk of them trying to ram you when you're on the skiff or shoot at you?
Yeah, that is a real risk, especially in the early stages. The first 24, 48 hours are tense, especially if you're on a vessel that's a Western power, U.S. flagged vessel, which we were sometimes. Usually they run, before they confront. But in multiple occasions, for example, on the story near the North Korean sea border, we bought our way onto a South Korean squid vessel, a Brazilian videographer and I, and went out and parked in a spot that satellite intel had told us was the standard throughway for, hundreds of Chinese vessels into North Korean waters, which was clear violation of UN sanctions. And so we just parked there and waited. We had to wait 2 hours before we saw a convoy coming through. And so we tucked in behind them and followed them, and they did not like that. And so the lead ship came at us and, sort of their standard escalation maneuvers at sea, and they made a couple of the escalation maneuvers, cut across our bow and, blared their horn, and our captain said, I'm out. This trip is over. So we went back to shore. And then a fair number of the vessels, especially long-term distant water vessels, have armed security on board. And so you don't want to get too close to the vessel in a skiff until you see who's coming to the side. And if anyone's armed, then you back off pretty quickly.
Yeah. But the time you came closest, when you ran afoul of the authorities was not with the Chinese authorities, but
Ecuador.
That's right, off Galapagos.
That's right. Yeah, ultimately the backstory is the Chinese had called in a request. This was after a trip from the Galapagos on a vessel out to the high seas. Spent a lot of time at the high seas, getting on board with permission to a number of Chinese vessels. Clearly, and one of those vessels was a vessel where several crew members said they were being held against their will, and could we rescue them discreetly? But clearly word had gotten back to the Chinese government, probably the captain saying, hey, you should, to the company head, you should know we had some Westerners on board, and they got a talking to for that. But word, while we were at sea, we had left from Galapagos on our way back, word had clearly gotten out in front of us. And some lobbyist types had called sympathetic lawmakers in Ecuador and said, this vessel should not be allowed back into Ecuador when it comes back in. So we were greeted by the Ecuadorian Navy and very aggressively boarded and sort of told that we were under arrest. And so the ambassador got involved, and here I am. There was a lot of negotiation, but we were allowed to let me and my crew off board, and the ship was allowed to refuel and then get out of Dodge.
So word gets around. You've now been doing this for several years. Presumably somewhere in the Chinese state, authorities are beginning to get aware of your existence, this operation. this prize won't help in that regard. And they will be aware that the work that you're doing puts China in a negative light. How worried are you that such access as you have to these vessels is going to get cut off, and that the risks and dangers to yourself and your staff are going to increase?
Well, I won't be traveling to China anytime soon.
But high seas,
on the high seas, I don't think we'll have any name recognition with Chinese captains. I think probably word is out that don't be letting Westerners on board. You know, so talking our way onto Chinese vessels will probably get harder. But honestly, I'm not sure that those ship captains are paying attention to that kind of news flash that much. Yeah, and we're moving around in our target. We're now looking into the South Korean, Taiwanese fleets, and the Spanish fleet, and the Norwegians. And so I think by the time we're back out there trying to talk our way onto Chinese vessels, things will have died down.
And we've been using the expression fleets, but typically is each ship owned by an individual? Is it a company that owns hundreds of ships? How does that work?
In China's case, there's more consolidation. So it's usually a collection of owners who own 3, 4, 5, 10 ships. It's more clustered. For the rest of the world, not so. It's pretty 1 or 2 ships, unless you're talking about the U.S. tuna fleet, very big money operations. In the case of China, about a third of the vessels on the high seas are somewhat or fully state-owned. The largest Chinese company, China National Fisheries Corporation, this company is what created the Distant Water Fishing Fleet, the modern Chinese Distant Water Fishing Fleet in 1986. And they have a lot of vessels. But what's interesting, too, is they also have the whole supply chain. So they have cold storage, they have ports, they have processing plants, they have exporters. They're vertically integrated.
And I suppose it's important to point out, as you were saying earlier, which is that the reason why this fleet exists and the reason why it has such a stranglehold on the global seafood supply is because the U.S. and other Western countries just didn't want to do that anymore. That business was, the margins were too small. It was a dirty business. It was a risky business, and we just offshored the work.
Yeah, it's just too hard. Like so many other things, the work is really brutal, and it's been outsourced for that reason.
And you were saying earlier that the merchant fleet, the big ships that carry, oil and Nike shoes, is a very small fraction of the number of vessels and the number of people working. But that part of the industry is pretty well regulated. There are eyes on those ships. There are rules that those ships are expected to follow. Yes, there are people who do play fast and loose with those rules, but there's a high risk if you break those rules, you'll get caught, and there is punishment. Why is that not the case with this fleet, especially for a company that owns hundreds of vessels?
A bunch of reasons. One, the simplest reasons are most folks don't know the names of fishing companies, whereas they know Maersk, right? And the supply chains tend to be shorter with merchant marine. There are not as many players not as many handoffs. With fishing, you have double, triple the number of handoffs, and there are other complicated factors. A merchant vessel is bringing a thing from A to B. A fishing vessel is out there doing the work, and then they're offloading to a mothership, and a mothership is visiting 40 different ships and collecting the catch and storing it and taking it back. So already you have one wall of anonymity and plausible deniability. And then come to land, and it's about 20 handoffs from there. And then just kind of more mushy variables, culture and sort of intellectual history, or the history of ideas surrounding fishing. This is a line of work as different from, standard manufacturing, garment or coal, in that there's this kind of veil of privacy and anonymity around you. As you said, your father was a fishing boat captain, and the gruff fishing boat captain, or he was a merchant captain, but the gruff captain is a real thing. It's not just a hollow stereotype. And people go into that line of work because they like being away from land, people, rules, governments, and that is a sort of synecdoche for a larger truism about the history of law and the idea of the sea as a place that is supposed to be free from governance, free from impositions. The one big mare liberum, kind of the one central kind of animating spirit in the history of maritime law is the rule that to be left alone. It's like on the high seas, pirates are not supposed to mess with you. Everyone is supposed to agree that you don't mess with this commerce. And that sort of has inculcated fewer tolls, fewer rules, fewer, boardings. So that's different than trains, planes, post 9/11, So the ability for a fishing boat captain to turn off their transponder and go dark, if you were flying a plane, post 9/11 especially, or driving a truck across borders in Europe, or a train, you would get in big trouble if you went dark. You would not balk if a reporter at the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times said, "What's your cargo? Who are your passengers?" You ask a fishing boat captain that, they look at you like you're crazy, because culturally they're not used to ever having to answer that to anyone, not even the port captain in the place they pull in. So the culture around this industry has loaned itself to a state where this product is 50 years behind most other products when it comes to governance.
So, final question for me, and then we'll come to the audience and questions from you. That the culture being what it is and being as well as ingrained as it is, and the degree of immunity these companies and individuals have, what is it that you're hoping to achieve? How do you see the needle being moved and conditions on board or on land improved in any way?
I mean, in the very typical journalistic way of my hope, quixotic though it may be, is to prove that you can trace the supply chain. The industry often says, "Oh, it's impossible. There's so many handoffs, and we're in the move, and we've got 10 different nationalities on board, and we're." That's ridiculous, and so we're here to prove that it's ridiculous. It'll take us 4 years, and it could take you 4 days to track your supply chain, but we're going to be able to piece all it together to show that Walmart or Whole Foods is getting that calamari from a vessel that engaged in human slavery and incursions in Argentinian water. We can do that. So we want to sort of prove that this industry should not be given a pass because it's impossible to track. And then I guess, seafood as a source of protein is rapidly emerging as, in China it just surpassed pork, and so I think that we hope to show that this one product, again, we look at arms trafficking and dumping of oil and all sorts of other things, not just seafood, but that's a great story. And I guess just the other thing journalistically I wanted to do when I left the Times was experiment with, kind of different rules of how you try to produce stories, but also how you try to disseminate them. And also new types of partnerships. You produce a story, you self-funded, and then you don't sell it. You partner with 40 different venues in 10 different languages and offer it to them for free, and it cost $1 million to produce over 4 years. If those editors can be reassured that you're not going to get them in trouble, you're a real journalist, then they're often delighted to get something so unusual. And I think that's where this kind of investigative long-form international journalism is going to have to go. So that's the other thing I'm trying to prove.
So that a couple of important points. One is that this content is not only available on the website. What the project does is makes these stories available through other media outlets around the world. So, you may have actually come across a story if you were not looking closely, without realizing that it came from Ian and his team. And the other point that he made briefly, which is that not all their journalism is about the Chinese fleets. They've been writing about other fleets, Indian, Korean, Taiwanese, and so on. And it's not only about fishing, but other crimes and misdemeanors in high seas, I think, if that's fair to say. So those are the questions for me. Is there a mic? Let's get some questions. Norm has one.
Thank you very much, Norman Carlson. Two quick comments and then a question. One, I think this year, as Marcus suggested, there were some extraordinary entries, and just reading through all of them, I had a whole list of possible winners, and then I hit your entry, and I suddenly said, this is actually a class of journalism that's beyond what you get to see very often, and just congratulations for extraordinary work. Second, in talking about the Oz Award, I think it's important to also note that the original idea for it really came from Richard Holbrooke when he was the chairman of the Asia Society, and it was his idea not only that there be a award about journalism, but that it also recognize Oz, and I think we've all been the beneficiaries of that. My question is how you go about getting funding for your projects, and where does most of your funding come from?
Yeah. So we're 2/3 funded by philanthropies and 1/3 funded by crowds, kind of subscriber models. We disseminate via Substack, and it's all free, but then we kind of guilt folks into throwing something in the hat, and that produces about 1/3. The other 2/3 is from large philanthropies, namely Bloomberg Philanthropies, Oak, Packard. These are all philanthropies that, well, at least at the outset in 2020 when I started, I went to some former editors of mine who were at ProPublica and said, how do I do this, church-state divide thing if I'm going to run my own outfit, and specifically how do I set up rules and a board so that I can be sure that I don't get zapped by the electrified fence that needs to be there, where donors are asking me to either do targeted hits, on specific topics they want, or they're wanting to see the story or whatever. So we set it up. First, we started with who's already giving money to the big players, AP, the Post, the Times, and could we get into their wallets? And then if we want to expand out from there, what terms do we lay down for these funders at the outset? And they're ones you could intuit. We don't take, funders often come knocking and say, we'd like you to do something on this. And I'm not going to pass judgment on outlets that do that. We don't, because it just gets me stressed out about, am I a contract killer? Have I become a hitman? So we obviously, and we often don't want to talk with donors. We tell donors I tell donors, here's what I'm planning on doing for the next 2 years. These are the big topics that I'm going to be focused on. If you like those topics and like that general area, then please give us operating budget funding. If you have other topics, then we're probably not the shop for you. So that's one of a bunch of different ways we try to keep it ethical, and but the big, we also stick with the big players and try to go for 2 to 4 year grants so that I don't spend all my time fundraising.
Other questions?
Thanks very much. This is Barbara Demick. I've also done some reporting in Dandong and at the North Korean border. I was really impressed by your sort of use of unconventional reporting techniques, to put it that way, some of the open source intelligence reporting. I think it was in Dandong you had private investigators go into one of the factories where North Korean women were working. And I was kind of amazed at the use of sending questionnaires into North Korea to interview workers, which to me, I think that's never been done before. So maybe you could elaborate.
Sure. Yeah. No. Well, so the OSI, the Open Source Intelligence work, is really spearheaded by a guy named Joe Galvin in Ireland, who's a staffer, and it was the thing that allowed us to really land the Xinjiang story, because who would ever expect that the most landlocked piece of dirt on the planet would be somehow tied to seafood? We certainly didn't, and everyone else didn't, I don't think. So figuring out, when we got hints that there were huge labor transfers going, especially post-COVID, from Xinjiang to Shandong, to the coast, we thought, well, how can we see how big and how can we prove it? The bar tends to be very high, especially before this series, in my relationship with editors, whether it's Remnick or South China Morning Post or the El País or Le Monde. Like, they know me a little bit, but this is high stakes stuff to publish, and so our level of proof has to be really high, and our fact check, version of the story is often hundreds of pages long. But the footage was key, mining hundreds or even thousands of hours of open source cell phone, typically footage, almost always average folk going from A to B, Xinjiang to Shandong, hey mom, this sort of stuff, but finding ways to do that on aggregate and find accounts we knew were folks from Xinjiang being moved or choosing to move over to Shandong, and then figuring out what factory are they in and what are they doing. And that was really exciting. I learned so much, and it was also delicious because it took obscene amounts to get all the footage and have it all lined up, but it's too much for an average person to consume. But then when the industry started reacting, because we also did this crazy thing where I decided we were going to publish every single interaction with industry, and this may be what Marcus was referring to. So we have, for every project, a discussion tab, which is every interaction, everything we sent to any company and what they said back. And we're going to publish it. And invariably, the companies hire the PR guy, and the PR guy wants to go off record. And, yes, might we get more truth if we were willing to go off record? Perhaps. But with all of them, I said, we're not going off record with anyone. And everything, whether it's governments or companies or NGOs, that is said to us and that we say to them, we're going to publish all in this one searchable database. So that was hugely helpful. But then when the story published, many of the government and companies were saying, well, it's just not true. We don't have any Uyghurs in our plant. And we hadn't yet put out the videos. And so then we just started putting out the videos saying, okay, but what's up with this footage? And that's when silence just sort of fell across the whole industry. And that, I think, drove a lot of the impact, being able to show that. And then newsletters and other odd sources. We mined a lot of company newsletters, often using coding to whittle it all down. But some huge companies like the Chisan Group have robust newspapers that are only read by fishmongers and these folks. And they're very open, saying thank you for having sent us these workers because we were in a bind after COVID, and thanks to 1,000 workers and the poverty alleviation program that helped us make this happen. So it was all in their own publications, and that too was great. And then the North Korean thing was a whole 11th hour gem, that kind of arrived where we realized there were large numbers in Dandong. There had been really good reporting already on Dandong with textile and other industries, and we thought, well, let's broaden into seafood because there's a huge seafood presence, and let's see if we can map how many and what plants have North Koreans. And it's a little easier, truth be told, because the language difference and the way that North Korean workers are herded and really they're wearing different color uniforms in the factories. So that was a little easier in one sense, but there's no OSI, there's no cell phone footage coming out of those factories. So that was harder. But, and the scariest thing for, I think, the New Yorker, who was our flagship partner on this one, you know, a lot of time spent with the lawyer about the use of folks going into the factory. They weren't private investigators in our sense of the term, but these were typically investigators who were there and they had a cousin who was a police officer or whatever, and they could go to the plant and have a walkthrough of the plant just to see how things are operating, and those folks would capture footage.
Other questions?
Hey, Ian, I'm Elizabeth Rosenthal, and I'm so thrilled to see this because I saw the like germination of it when we were both at the New York Times. But how did you get these big ships to be on? I mean, who were they that they said like, oh, I'm a journalist and I want to get that other ship?
Yeah. There are different categories. So NGOs, so Greenpeace, Sea Shepherd. And again, to Norm's question, you got to be careful with the kind of getting too close to the advocates. So kind of rules of engagement with them, similar sort of, okay, here's what we would like to go out with you. You're heading to this fishing ground that no one ever goes to. We'd like to go with you, but here are rules that we have for this relationship. And it's always, we've only ever once last year run into an issue where we had to cancel a trip because they were not willing to play by our rules. So that's one category. There are maybe 4 or 5, maybe 4 NGOs that have big enough ships that can do that. And I'm always keeping in touch with them as to where they're gonna be anyway, and would they be willing to. And then you have other types of NGOs that aren't ocean. So Doctors Without Borders, we've gone out with them a bunch of times on migrant stuff where they're doing rescues, and then government. So navies, coast guards, and then the last one tends to be the you buy your way. Hey, Mr. Fisherman, you're a South Korean squid fisherman. How much do you make in a month? X. Okay, if I pay you 2 times X, would you take me out, leave your crew here, and follow my orders unless you feel unsafe? And that is, it gets expensive, but less so as you move further into the global south. But also, you got to be careful about what ships you're getting on the further you go into the global south, because you might not come back. And the conditions on board are dirty.
Thanks so much, Ian. I had a question about your editor saying, why is this not about power? I think it was the New Yorker editor. And that question of the projection of power. These ships, by and large, are not owned by the state, right? So I'm really curious about whether the Chinese government knows about what's going on. Do they know about the incursions into other countries' waters, et cetera? To what extent do you really think this is about power, or is it rather kind of capitalism at its most ruthless?
Yeah, not to be Pollyanna, but probably a little both, in my view. In the China case in particular, so how much does the Chinese government know things are going on? I think maybe 4 years ago, China had this big campaign. It had some grand term like Operation Sharp Sword or something like this, and they were going to crack down on their own fleet. And out of that came the realization that there were 100,000 ships that they had no license, that were just off books entirely. So that gives you a sense of scale of the dark part of their own fleet that they don't know anything about. The distant water ones that go really far, I think generally the Chinese government does know, and especially as you get down more local, it becomes a very proud local. A lot of the subsidies that go to specific clusters of fleets are not central government, but rather that specific port and that city that has raised, because they're really trying to increase local revenue and commerce. And so they put up enough money for a medical ship to go with that cluster of 12 squid vessels, and they pay for a medical ship to be there in case anyone gets sick, et cetera. And that's usually local level subsidies that I think, put it this way. So the Chinese government would say, we don't know really what these guys are doing, just as you Americans don't know when your folks do bad things. On the other hand, in 2020, there was a lot of, as one example, press around, a lot of it misled, but around the Chinese peril posed to the Galapagos. And it was all about all these ships and it's going to ruin Darwin's paradise. And there were on the order of 200-300 Chinese vessels that were really close to the line. Some of them, maybe a dozen, 2 dozen max, were turning off, going dark, and invading, coming out. But most of them were right on the line. So they were huge press flurry, about 40 articles, we counted them up, in a 6-month period, all about and the Chinese government put out word, back off. Within 2 weeks, everyone, the entire fleet, we know because we went out there and we looked at the satellite, and they said 25 to 50 miles from the line. They all did it. So, do they know? Do they have the ability to control? That would seem to indicate they can, but they don't often get involved unless it's really becoming a headache, and that was a big headache.
Question?
Thank you. It's a fascinating story. How do you see the future of the deep sea fishing trade? Is anything going to change for the better, for the worse, or is it business as usual going forward?
No, I think things are already changing. I started this in 2014, and the Times series ran 2015, 2016. Jump a decade later to now, and there were occasional stories in that time frame. The Wall Street Journal and The Guardian and others, AP, did occasional one-offs, really impressive one-offs, but one-offs. They didn't have reporters dedicated to. Now, the Pulitzer Center has a huge program. They're funding all sorts of folks. AP has designated reporters just doing ocean stuff based in Dakar. There's a lot happening just in journalism, if that's a metric of consistent and really sophisticated, impressive reporting. Use satellite and ground games and OSI, and so that's already. And then also the industry, the China project was game-changing for the industry. And this isn't self-aggrandizement. It's just there was a threshold reached where after the AP won the Pulitzer in 2015 on sea slavery issues all the way to now, I think the industry hoped that this would die down as a topic, and now the industry knows that it's not going away, and there's better tracking and the ability to prove. I see watch tapping. So
No,
curious. No, not at all. So I think governments are realizing there's going to be consistent coverage. There are better tools out there to actually prove the dots between crimes and concerns and consumers. And then journalism outfits are sticking with it for longer.
One more question?
I raised my hand because I didn't see any. I thought there was such a precious time to waste, but thank you. Admittedly, I haven't seen your work yet, but I would definitely do so. But you have a North Korea angle.
I do.
A lot of illicit deals between China and North Korea. But in the case of North Korea, there is an international mechanism that when alerted to these things would act upon it. Take this to the governments and the sanctions committee. No longer there, but it was there until last year.
Right.
So did your work have any impact on the work of the sanctions committee?
We talk with them a lot. I mean, this is one of the things, again, I wanted to do in leaving the Times was have a different relationship in the lead up to publishing and in the afterward. So have ongoing conversations with government and non-government players about. We never weigh in on what the solutions should be or legislation or anything like that. We just try to explain how we did things, and if folks want the back end concrete data, whether it's the UFLPA, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, or CATSA, the U.S. law on North Korean labor, or the UN committee, we try to, I have one person on staff and all he does is figure out who are the players that really care and have tools to do something about this stuff, and how can we make sure that they've seen the reporting? Because you don't just want numbers in journalism. You want the important change makers, those 5 people that actually can do something. So we try to seek them out and say, have you seen this? And that's all that this one person does. So he had multiple meetings with them before it was disbanded and said, here's how we did it, and do you have any more questions? And we were trying to stoke more. We didn't get very far because maybe it was already planned for that to disappear.
I'll ask one final question, which is there anything we can do? Is there anything a responsible consumer can do? To identify what we're eating, to be able to tell? Is there a mechanism by which we're better informed about the choices we make, what calamari we choose to buy?
Yeah, this is the question I still haven't figured out how to answer. I honestly think if this was called the Outlaw Lettuce Project, we'd be finding much of the same thing. There are some distinct things about the sea that lend itself to abuses and crimes, etc. But I don't know that I believe that there's any product in the current globalized world that is free of many of these issues. Yeah. So that means the inverse. I don't know that there aren't great tools yet for, as a consumer, choosing good versus bad. Hopefully we'll help stoke that. There's some, Monterey Bay Aquarium has a ranking system, but most of them are environmentally focused and ocean conservation focused. They don't even know what to do about human rights issues. So I don't have a good answer for you on that.
Well, hopefully your project will get us there eventually. Congratulations again on the prize. I'm sure I speak for all of us in wishing you well in the years ahead and we'll all look forward to more stories from you. And again, I'm gonna repeat myself. Go to the website, read the stories, particularly watch those videos. And listen to the audio. They're really extraordinary amount of journalism. I have been on the awards committee in the past, and so I know the kinds of quality that you get to see. But having seen the final product, it blew me away. It was quite amazing.
Thank you.
Congratulations again. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.